It seems like the hardy hole on every anvil is a little bit different, even if they look like the same size initially. This new anvil in the small shop has about a 1 1/4 hardy hole. My big anvil in the other shop has about a 1 1/4 hardy hole, but they aren't quite the same. The one over there is a little bit larger, so those tools won't fit this anvil unless I grind them down. If I grind them down to fit this, then they don't fit that one very well. So we need to make some new tools for this anvil, and we've looked at making some for the little 30-kilogram anvil that we were using in here initially. And while we could make an adapter to make these fit this anvil, I think I'm going to leave these alone. They belong to that other anvil, and we're going to make new tools for this anvil. Now, forging hardy tools is a really good exercise, but as the hardy hole gets larger, going from these 3/4 inch shank tools up to 1 1/4 inch is a whole lot more work. It's not just a little bit more, it's exponentially more work, and doing that by hand is going to take a lot of time. It can certainly be done, and I don't want to discourage you from doing that. But if you just want to get some tools made, maybe you're in the middle of a job and just need a special jig that's going to get something accomplished right now, and you don't want to spend the whole day making a tool, or you just need an assortment of bending forks and jigs, things like that, to do your routine work, sometimes fabricating those is better. What I mean by fabricating is cut pieces and parts, weld them together, and get back to work. It's much more efficient, and you can create a lot more things. But you need to have welding equipment to do that, and good welding equipment can be kind of pricey. So today we're going to take a look at a little welder that our friends from Vevor sent us. And when I say a little welder, I mean little. I can't believe how small this thing is. This is just a little arc welder or stick welder. It doesn't use wire, it doesn't need gas, so it's not TIG, MIG, any of that kind of stuff. It just uses regular old rods. 110, 120 power, or 220, 240, whatever it is you got. It's adaptable to both of those. But to keep things simple, I'm going to go over to the other shop. There is no power in this shop. And hopefully we will be able to use this, as simple and inexpensive as it is, to build some functional tools that we will use for years to come. And today's video, of course, is being sponsored by Vevor, and they sent the welder out for free, along with an auto darkening welding hood. Interestingly, I think the hood is more expensive than the welder, but both are pretty reasonably priced if you're just getting started. This is their MMA 140, so it's 140 amp maximum power. And on 110 power, that only goes up to 120 amps. If you want the full 140 amps, you're going to have to plug that into a 220 volt circuit. And the plug adapter they send with it goes into a typical 50 amp circuit. Now, it probably doesn't need 50 amps. I don't know if it says or not. Well, I don't see anything in here that tells you what size breaker you need on that. If anybody has one of these in their shop already, let us know what size breaker you're running it on. I'd be interested to know. I'm just going to run this on a regular 110 circuit with the plug that's attached to it and see what we can get done. If it doesn't work well that way, I will go ahead and plug the adapter and try it on 220 just to see what it's capable of at higher power. But my goal here is to find out if this is accessible for people with minimal shop space, minimal setup. You're working out of a garage that maybe has one circuit in it to run the garage door opener and a light, and you have to unplug that to plug this in. Maybe your forge is set up out on the driveway, and you just need to weld stuff occasionally. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that if you're going into business as a welder, this isn't the machine you want. And probably even if your blacksmithing is going to use a lot of fabrication in combination with the forge work, you're going to want something nicer. But if you're just welding a few simple tools for the anvil, maybe making a tong rack to hang on the wall of your shop or a hammer rack, something like that, I'm hoping this will do the job and get people started making tools like that on a more reasonable budget. Now, I'll put a link to both of these things. The auto darkening hood that they sent actually has a little mode switch on the side here, so you can change it from the welding shade to a grinding shade, so you don't have to always take this off and get into the controls on the inside. It also came with a GoPro mount, so you can mount a GoPro if you need to video your welding. I don't own a GoPro that will fit in the mount that they sent. I have a different action camera and it's not compatible. But that also brings up the point that I'm not trying to teach you how to weld here. I've always told people that I own a welder. That doesn't make me a welder. I weld well enough for my purposes, but I generally don't weld for other people, and I certainly never weld for anything that's going to go down the highway. Now, as far as the tools go, we're just going to make some very simple jigs using short bits of cut-off material that I found out there, stuff that might normally be scrap and go to a recycler. We're going to talk about some creative ways to make some hardy tools without always having to have a solid square shank for the tool, although that's certainly an option as well. Now we're up to 120. Now, I've never experienced that kind of pulsing arc before, and it's really kind of weird. It makes it real hard to run a clean bead. As a result, these are probably some of the ugliest welds I've ever done. Just as a comparison, I fired up my other welder and ran a bead with it. Runs much smoother at the same amperage setting, but it's also a $2,000 welder. That's about 30 times more expensive than this little thing is. I then did a little bit of experimenting with this. I plugged it into 220, runs much smoother on 220. That pulsing effect goes away completely on 220 power, and it goes away on 110 power if I turn it down to 70 amps. So even though this says it will weld 120 amps at 110 power, I don't think that's realistic. And you can make these tools with that lower setting, but it's really going to be limiting. So I'm going to make a simple version of a bending jig, kind of jig I'd use for hooks quite regularly. This is actually one I'm borrowing the idea from, I think it's Nigel Barrett, a UK blacksmith, and I'll link to his video up here if you want to watch his video on the subject. But for that jig, I'm just going to use a little bit of 1-inch black pipe and some 1/4 by 1.5 inch flat bar, and we can make this work in the hardy hole. That's really just a quick overview on how you can make some of these simple welded up jigs. I think this idea that I kind of stole from Nigel is one of the simplest ways to do this, and it also works in the vise very nicely. So this is a real useful jig. You can make these at all sorts of different sizes. If you're doing a variety of hooks, you just make these in whatever sizes you need. If you have to shape big rings, you can do that on a tool like this, and it comes in really handy. The one with the solid square bar, the bending fork, took just a little bit more effort because the welds can be in the way for the hardy hole. So I ground those down, got them down nearly to the point that they fit, and then heated the whole thing up and kind of drove it down in the hardy hole so it has a better fit. Still too hot to hold on to, but it's a good, useful tool. This bending fork will get used a lot over there. And you kind of split the difference between those two tools by using a base plate, but instead of the solid square hardy shank, you can just weld a diagonal piece of steel in there that goes corner to corner of the hardy hole or fits in the vise just like the other one did. And these are very useful tools, very simple way to build hardy tools. Personally, I prefer tubing for these welded up tools, but unfortunately, I have 1.5" tubing and I have 1" tubing. Now the 1.5" I could go into the power hammer and forge it down to 1.25" and that would work. Or I could weld a bead on all 4 sides of the 1" tubing and build it up, or weld a couple of pieces of 1/8" steel all the way around it. But there's no reason to go through that kind of work. I'll just wait till I'm in town again, stop by the steel yard and see if I can find some cutoffs of some 1.25" tubing. Welding a hardy shank on a spring folder makes that very useful. And that's a tool we'll look at doing the whole tool one of these days over there in that little shop. And I have other tools, just probably dozens of tools that have been welded up and fabricated like that. They're fast, they're simple, they're effective. They don't have to be particularly pretty. You don't have to be an expert welder to make these and make tools that are going to last you for years and years. So what do I think about this little welder from Vevor? It would certainly be unfair to compare this head-to-head with my Lincoln 215 multi-process welder, but that other welder costs $2,000 and you can spend lots more than that on a welder. This is about $75 right now on Vevor, and I think there's a discount code down in the video description that'll get you another 5% off of that. So if you're budget-minded and this is about all you're really going to do with a welder, well, you can do these, you can do hammer racks, tong racks, things like that for storing tools in your shop. I might even weld up fly press tools with a welder like this, but I probably wouldn't weld up power hammer tools or hydraulic press tools. They're going to see a lot of really heavy work. I just don't know if I trust the welds out of this, especially running on 110 power. 70 amps is about the best I could run this, even though it's rated at 120. So that's a little bit disappointing. I don't think I'd ever run an 1/8" rod. The 3/32 is probably the limit for that. But on 220 power, this did much better. So if you have 220 power available, this is going to give you better performance. And you're just going to have to work with it. Ideally, you do a whole lot of test welds and run a lot of rod, different settings, different polarity, and just see what works best for it and what's going to suit your needs. It is certainly a functional tool, but it's probably not a tool I would go out and buy for my shop. There was a time, though, that I probably would have liked this. My first welder was a Lincoln Buzzbox, the Tombstone style welder, AC only, and it was a good functional welder, but it was also 220, and the breaker box was on the complete opposite side of the house of where the garage was that I was working in, and I think I spent more money on the cable to run a new circuit to run the welder on than what I spent on the welder. Because this would run on 110, it would have been really handy in that situation, and it's a lot easier to store if you don't use it all the time. So the decision on whether or not you want to use a budget-friendly tool like this is entirely up to you. It probably doesn't suit my work anymore in my shop or the place I'm at in my blacksmithing career. But if you're just getting started, you just need to make some simple tools, it is certainly an option. The welding hood worked perfectly fine. It did everything you expect a welding hood to do. The hood, I think, is actually priced a little higher than the welder is, but still, for an investment of less than $200, you've got a welder, you've got a hood, money left over to go buy a welding rod, a chipping hammer, and some gloves, so it's not a bad place for the beginner. I guess one of the things that concerns me most about some of the budget-friendly tools is they probably don't always have the best service after the purchase. If this thing breaks, it's probably disposable and you just buy another one. Whereas if you're buying Lincoln or Miller, you're going to be able to get service and get the thing repaired and probably have really good warranty service when you buy something new. Hope you have time in your day to get out to your shop. Make something, but stay safe, wear your safety glasses. We'll see you for the next video.